Bismillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. So I was asked to see if I can provide a summary of the khutbah yesterday. So I'll try to provide a summary, at least of some of the main points, and maybe even add in a little bit more detail where I can in certain areas, inshallah. So really the central message of the khutbah yesterday, it was really around change, and specifically changing for the better. And I tried to approach that topic by first looking at the changes that happened in the life of one of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ. And then through that change, which was, there was good changes, there was bad changes that happened within the life of that companion, look to convey some takeaways, from his life, and then how we can then use those lessons to also implement changes in our lives, inshallah. So we started off with talking about an opportunity that we had recently to make changes in our life, which was the month of Ramadan, right? The month of Ramadan was supposed to be a month that we used to make changes, to be able to implement certain habits, certain practices, increase our closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as I mentioned in the khutbah, some of us were able to do that. Some of us maybe not so much. And some of us, right, we enter the month a certain way and we came out of the month the same exact way, right? There was no changes, unfortunately. And I mentioned that change a lot of times, right? Sometimes we get comfortable within our routines, and it's tough to change that routine, right? So at many times, change can be a struggle for us. And one of the famous verses that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions related to changes that everybody quotes, right? Which, who remembers the verse? إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُوا مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. Right? Allah doesn't change the state of a people until they change what's in themselves, right? So it's this idea of working toward change. And I mentioned specifically, one of the areas that I mentioned is this concept of consistency. Having consistency in what you do and building upon that. Starting small, being consistent, and then building momentum and building upon that, right? Like the Prophet ﷺ said, أَحَبُّ الْأَعْمَالِ إِلَى اللَّهِ أَدْوَمُهَا وَإِنْ قَلَّ. Right? The most beloved actions in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are those that are consistent, yet they are small, even if they're small, right? So I remember in previous sessions where we talked about the concept of sticking to something, the concept of being firm and standing firm. And there's a term that's used for that, if you remember what that term is. Does anybody remember what that term is? The concept of what? Istiqamah, right? The concept of istiqamah, right? To be able to stand firm, like the Prophet ﷺ was asked by one of the companions, قُلْ لِي فِي الْإِسْلَامِ قَوْلًا لَا أَسْأَلُ عَنْهُ أَحَدًا غَيْرَكَ. Right? Tell me something about Islam that I can't ask of anyone but you. He said, قُلْ what? قُلْ آمَنْتُ بِاللَّهِ ثُمَّ اسْتَقِمْ. Say, I believe in Allah and be firm. And that summarizes everything. Right? If you want to summarize the entire religion, it's that. Believe in Allah and stand firm. That's it, really, right? But sometimes we have there's an issue with staying consistent, right? And we have to sometimes ask ourselves, why is it so hard? Right? Why is it so hard to stay consistent, right? Does anybody like to maybe offer? I'm trying to make it a little bit interactive. So, does anybody want to offer a thought on that? Right? Why perhaps that consistency can be tough for us? Boredom. Boredom. Okay. Anybody else want to say something? Okay. One thing we could say, maybe there's a lot of, sometimes in our lives we have a lot of distractions, right? That kind of pull you away from being focused on things, right? And unfortunately, sometimes we're not disciplined enough to be able to stick with something in the short term to be able to see long-term results, right? Why? Because unfortunately, the culture nowadays is sometimes we want instant gratification. We want to see it, I want it and I want it now. I want to see it now. I want it to happen right now, right? And when we don't see that, we get frustrated sometimes, right? And we have to realize, as I mentioned in the khutbah, sometimes things take time. It's not about obtaining quick results. It's about maintaining incremental progress over a long period of time, staying consistent, right? And then also sometimes what prevents us is we're focusing on the outcome. We're simply focusing on the outcome, and we're not, as opposed to the process itself, or the journey, as they say, right? So we see a specific end goal, we get excited about that, and we don't realize that if anything that is valuable, right, something that is valuable to get you excited about, it's not going to be achieved without hard work. Right? You need time, you need effort, right? And you need patience to be able to do that. So there are certain mechanisms that we need to be able to stay consistent. So I'll mention just a few things, and I know I'm going off track a little bit from the khutbah, but there's a certain details that I didn't get into in the khutbah that I think it's worthwhile just to talk about them, mention them, and then I'll come back to the framework of the khutbah, inshallah. So with regards to staying consistent, one thing that we can think about is the concept of patience, right? And this is a tough one, right? Because again, some things just take time, right? For example, a baby takes 9 months to develop in the womb. That's the time it takes. You can't say, well, I want it to be 2 months. No, it's 9 months. That's what it takes. Sometimes it has to be gone through. That's what it takes to happen, right? And patience, it comes from what? Right? Well, actually, let me rephrase that. Why are people impatient? Let's think about it that way. Okay. So for example, if you think about like the last time you were caught in traffic, right? So now the line is long and you're sitting there waiting and you can't do anything and you become impatient. What emotion do you feel at that point? Anger? You're frustrated, right? Maybe tired too, yeah. You're frustrated, but you're frustrated why? Because you can't control the situation. Right? You're frustrated, you're angry, and you want things to change. You want there to be, but you can't do anything about it. So you get frustrated and you get impatient, right? But we have to realize certain things are out of our control. Certain things are just out of our, right? There are certain things that we have to we ask ourselves, did I do everything that I can to influence the situation, whatever situation you're in, right? If I want to change, if I want the help of Allah, okay, did I do everything in my power? Did I take initiative? Did I take action? Did I do everything that I can to be able to change? And if the answer is yes, then you say, that's it. I leave the rest to Allah, subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? That's all I can do. I leave the rest to Allah. Because I've done everything that I can, right? I put all my effort, all my energy, I use the means to be able to do something, and that's it. Say, Ya Allah, the rest is up to you. I've done everything, right? So again, that consistency, those small actions, they're stages, right, that we have to go through to get to a final goal. Even when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He talks about, if you remember, the concept of when like intoxicants were made haram, did He immediately come out and say, okay, this change is coming, O you who believe, tomorrow morning, no more intoxicants? He could have said that. He could have said it that way, right? But what did He reveal first? Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, what? La taqrabu salata wa antum sukara. O you who believe, don't approach prayer while you're drunk, while you're intoxicated, right? And then He came back and said what? So that was implemented for a while. And then He came back and said what? إنما الخمر والميسر والأنصاب والأزلام رجس من عمل الشيطان فاجتنبوه لعلكم تفلحون. Right? So stay away from it. Right? So because some people they think like they're clever. He said He didn't say haram. No, He said it's even more than that. He said you can't even go near it. Right? So I'm sure you guys, for example, in your workplace, right? When they want to have meetings, they want to go out to drink, right? The logic doesn't fit with them because you tell them, you say, I can't go. He said, well, you don't have to drink. Why can't you sit with us? So no, I cannot be in that environment. I can't even sit where you're sitting. Right? I can't be there. And to them, it doesn't register, right? But it's more than that, right? So tip number one, when we think about again, the concept of patience, realizing that things take time, right? And then number two, one other thing that we keep in mind is it's the value of what you're doing. Keep that in mind, right? So yes, you're getting reward for things, right? You're getting that reward. You're building those good deeds. But at the same time, right, this is about your life and your quality of life, right? Ultimately, we all want to be happy, right? We want to have a good life, but that is, again, a byproduct. Happiness is a byproduct. Byproduct of what? Of fulfilling your purpose. Right? If you do what Allah asks you to do, fulfill what Allah asks you to do, that in turn, because the Creator knows what's best for us. He knows what's going to make us happy. He's saying there's a certain function that I've created you for, a certain thing that I've created you for, right? And I need to fulfill that purpose. So for example, like when we say, like, how do we know there's a problem, for example? Like, I'm not truly fulfilling what I'm supposed to be doing. How do we know there's a problem with anything? Like, say, for example, you have a car, right? A car, the purpose of a car is I'm supposed to take me from point A to point B, transportation. Okay? So if that car doesn't take me from point A to point B, I say what? There's a problem with the car. Why? Because it's not fulfilling its function. It's not doing what it was made to do. Right? So if I have a phone, for example, right, and I can't call from one place to another, the phone is not doing what it's supposed to do. It's not fulfilling its function, right? So I say there's a problem with the phone. So in order to know if I have a problem, I say, okay, what is my function? What was I made to do? And what's the answer? What's that? Yes, to know Allah and to worship Him, right? So if I find myself that I don't gain any pleasure or happiness, or I'm not interested in doing that, in fulfilling that function, there's a problem. There's a problem, right? So getting consistent, right? Coming back to that, right? So I mentioned in the khutbah as well that really there's no magic formula to this. People want some quick fix. How do I? It's time, it's effort, and it's patience, right? That's what it's really want. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأَلَيْسَ لِلْإِنسَانِ إِلَّا مَا سَعَى. Human beings will have what they strive for, right? What you strive for is what you get, right? What else did He say? He says, وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. Right? Those who strive hard in our cause, strive hard in our cause, and we guide them to our path. But you have to take the initiative. You have to put the effort to do that, right? Okay, there's more here, but let me come back to what we talked about in the khutbah as well. So, Brother Ahmed, just stop me if you need me to cut me off. So we looked at. So again, we were examining change, and we were looking at the life of one of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, and specifically we looked at Abu Sufyan ibn al-Harith. Right? So for those who were there and listening, what was the relationship of Abu Sufyan ibn al-Harith to the Prophet ﷺ? Sorry, I think I heard a comment in the back maybe? Correct. Yeah, but there's a blood relationship too. Cousin, through father's side or mother's side? Father's side, right? So we mentioned in the khutbah that, right, the father of the Prophet ﷺ is who? Abdullah, right? And Abdullah had several brothers, right? And we mentioned several. Who remembers? Who was one of the brothers of Abdullah? Abu Talib, right? And from him comes Ali ibn Abi Talib, may Allah be pleased with him. Another one of the brothers, Al-Abbas, right? Abdullah ibn Abbas. And Abdullah ibn Abbas, I mean, it's amazing, right? You open up any book of tafsir, as I was saying in the khutbah, you'll find commentary from Abdullah ibn Abbas, right? And then who else? Harith, right? And that's where we get Abu Sufyan ibn al-Harith, right? So I was saying that the Prophet ﷺ, when he was young, he had a caretaker, like what we call a nanny, right? Halimatu Sa'diyah, right? So she would nurse him, she would take care of him, and at the same time, as someone I think in the back was saying, she was also taking care of Abu Sufyan ibn al-Harith, right? And the relationship between the Prophet ﷺ, right, and him was one that was very, very close, right? And I wanted to illustrate that in the khutbah by mentioning, like, for you to think about the relationship that you have, right? Like the relationship that you had when you were a child. Maybe you had a brother, a sister that was of the same age as you, a cousin that was of the same age as you, that you were very close with, right? That you formed a bond with, that you were playing with, you were laughing with, right? You were going on adventures together. You were imagining things together, right? You were very close to each other. That's the relationship that they had, right? So when you have a relationship like that with somebody whom you've grown to trust, right? There's someone that you feel has your back. It hurts even more when that person turns around and stabs you in the back. When that person turns around and betrays you in some way, right? It hurts even more. The emotional pain, the psychological pain related to that, right? It's different, right? If you have someone who's an acquaintance who does that, you say, you may not think twice. You might blow it off. But someone whom you've grown close to, someone who you grew up with, right? Someone who you were around, that's different, right? It's different. So that was their relationship, as I mentioned. And it was like that for a very, very long time, until the time when the Prophet ﷺ, he started to receive the revelation, the wahi, right? And that's when people started to turn their back on him, right? And among the ones who did that, as I mentioned, was Abu Sufyan ibn al-Harith, right? He also turned his back. But what made it even worse, as I mentioned, was that it's not about just him turning his back. He's actively now working against the Prophet ﷺ, right? So he was someone, as many of the Arabs at the time, they were very good with poetry. So he himself was also good with poetry. So here he is, he's making poetry against the Prophet ﷺ. He's gathering people to incite people against the Prophet ﷺ, right? So he's in a position to where, as I mentioned, imagine you have somebody who you're so close to, they turn their back on you, you're going through tough times now, right, in your life. And here's someone you expect to be there, to have your back. And all these tough times you're going through, instead of not supporting you, they're actively going against you, right? And I mentioned some of the tough times that the Prophet ﷺ went through, all the way from, he was stoned at Ta'if, he lost his wife, Khadija, may Allah be pleased with her, right? And this is a separate topic, maybe, inshallah, maybe one day we'll focus on her, but what a woman. I mean, Khadija, may Allah be pleased with her, what a woman. I mean, amazing. So, I lost my train of thought. So he turns his back on him. And then this happens, again, for a very long time. So until what time? Who remembers? How long did he continue to act this way toward the Prophet ﷺ? Almost 20 years, yeah. Almost 20 years. And now, if we fast forward to the time where it's close to the conquest of Mecca, Fathu Mecca, right? So now, what happened is the news is spreading, the Prophet ﷺ is coming, people know that he's coming, right? And Abu Sufyan ibn al-Harith, he's living in Mecca. Some of his relatives have already converted to Islam, right? And as I mentioned in the khutbah, his wife sparks something inside of him, right? Sometimes, as I mentioned, there's somebody, you do something, you act a certain way for a while, and then somebody close to you comes to you and wakes you up, right? And says, think about what you're doing. What are you doing? Right? And then you think about it yourself and you start realizing, my goodness, what have I been doing? And you feel sometimes embarrassed about it, right? And you say, you know what, you're right. I haven't been acting the right way. I need to change. I have to change for the better. I can't be like this, right? And she tells him, she says, you know his character, you know who he is, you've lived with him. What's wrong with you, right? You are sitting there continuously opposing him, yet you would have been one of the first ones to support him and help him, right? So he says that his relatives continued to talk to him, push him, right? And eventually he came around. He says, "Hatta sharaha Allahu sadri lil Islam." Then Allah opened my heart. He opened my chest to Islam, right? But now is a critical moment. Why? Because remember, he's known as an enemy to the Muslims. And now he's thinking what? So now I've been opposing the Muslims for 20 years. But now I got to go tell the Prophet ﷺ. I'm going to go see him. So what does he decide to do? He decides that I'm going to go to where the Muslims are camped at, and I'm going to go see the Prophet ﷺ. But he goes in disguise. Why? Because all of the Muslims, again, know him as an enemy. And if they see him, what's the first thing that's going to come to their mind? He's here to do what? Yeah, to assassinate the Prophet ﷺ. He's here to kill the Prophet ﷺ, right? So he goes, right? And he's keeping a very, very low profile, so he's not recognized, right? Until he sees the Prophet ﷺ come on his ride. And he says, فَتَصَدَّيْتُ لَهُ وَوَقَفْتُ تِلْقَاءَهُ. I confronted him, and then I stood in front of him. And then he says, وَحَسَرْتُ عَنْ وَجْهِي فَمَا إِنْ مَلَأَ عَيْنَيْهِ مِنِّي وَعَرَفَنِي حَتَّى أَعْرَضَ عَنِّي إِلَى النَّاحِيَةِ الْأُخْرَى. He says that I uncovered my face, his eyes saw me, and they recognized me, and he turned to the other direction. And I emphasize the point in the khutbah that in this particular instant, right, we have to understand something. The Prophet ﷺ, in the end, he's a human being too. He can be hurt. You hurt him big time. He hurt him big time by what he did, right? And I gave the example, and I said that, when somebody is sitting there for 20 years, fighting, killing, oppressing, doing all these things against you, and then all of a sudden they show up in your life out of nowhere. How is that going to make you feel? Right? You sit there and you say, wait a minute, right? Like I said in the khutbah, you might say, first of all, you're in a little bit of a shock, right? But normally a person would probably say, wait a minute, what do you? If it was a normal person, you would say, what are you doing here, right? And you would have maybe somebody get him, kill him, do something to him, right? Harm him in some way. The Prophet ﷺ doesn't do that. He doesn't speak harshly to him. He doesn't have anybody harm him. He simply turns away from him. And as I mentioned, Abu Sufyan ibn al-Harith, he keeps trying though. He says, فَتَحَوَّلْتُ إِلَى نَاحِيَةِ وَجْهِهِ. So then I turned to the direction of his face. He says, فَأَعْرَضَ عَنِّي وَحَوَّلَ وَجْهَهِ. But he turned away from me. He turned his face away. But he tries again. He says, what? فَتَحَوَّلْتُ إِلَى نَاحِيَةِ وَجْهِهِ. I turned to him again, but he turned away from me, and he did that repeatedly. Right? So where am I at on time? 19. So let me keep going. Okay. I'm going a little bit slow, but I can speed it up. Okay. So I'm trying to get summarize it and get the main points. So he goes. So the Muslims, again, they're going toward Mecca, and now they're camped out again. And he keeps trying, right? So he sits at the door of the Prophet ﷺ. Where the Prophet is staying, he sits at his door. But when the Prophet ﷺ sees him, فَلَمَّا رَآنِي وَهُوَ خَارِجٌ مِّن مَنْزِلِهِ أَشَاحَ عَنِّي بِوَجْهِهِ. He turned his face away again from him, right? But then he says what? He says, فَلَمْ أَيْأَسْ مِنْ اسْتِرْضَائِهِ وَجَعَلْتُ كُلَّ مَا نَزَلَ فِي مَنْزِلٍ أَجْلِسُ عَلَى بَابِهِ. I didn't despair of seeking his pleasure. But every time I would sit at his door. every single time. But فَكَانَ إِذَا أَبْصَرَنِي أَعْرَضَ عَنِّي. When he would see me, he would just turn away from me. Right? So I'm skipping a little bit forward. We get to the point now where the Fath Mecca happens, right? And what happens? There's the tribes around Arabia who are gathering to fight against the Muslims. Right? There's a big conglomerate of tribes who are all helping each other to fight against the Muslims, and that was known as the Battle of Hunain. Right? And he says something to himself, right? That before he goes into the battle, he says, "Wallahi لأكفرن اليوم عن كل ما سلف مني من عداوة رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ولا يرين النبي من أثري ما يرضي الله ويرضيه." He says, this day I'm going to make up for everything. Right? Everything that I've done toward the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this day I'm going to make up for it. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is going to see from me that which pleases Allah and that which pleases him. Right? So now, is everything okay? Okay. So then he goes into the battle. But he wraps his face, he disguises himself. Okay? So the battle is ongoing. And I mentioned in the khutbah that there's a moment in the battle where it's very critical, where the Prophet ﷺ is left exposed. Right? So he's fighting, right, against the disbeliever. He's pushing forward, and there's not many people that are around him that are also there fighting. Right? On the left side is his uncle, Al-Abbas. On the right side is Abu Sufyan ibn al-Harith, fighting against. But the way it's described, again, the way he's fighting, he is going all out. He's giving everything he's got, putting all his energy into it, with bravery, with passion, right? And he says there, I wish that I would have died defending the Prophet ﷺ at that point, right? He says, "Wallahu ya'lamu anni uridu al-mawta duna Rasulillahi sallallahu alaihi wasallam." And then the Prophet ﷺ, which as I mentioned in the khutbah, this was a moment that is an amazing moment. The Prophet ﷺ, he notices this person is basically going all out, defending him, right? He says, فَلَمَّا نَظَرَ النَّبِيُّ إِلَى حُسْنِ بَلَائِي قَالَ لِعَمِّيَ الْعَبَّاسِ مَنْ هَذَا؟ When the Prophet notices, he said to my uncle, and Abu Sufyan himself is narrating, who is this? Who is this? Right? He said, هذا أخوك وابن عمك أبو سفيان بن الحارث فضى عنه أي رسول الله. It's your brother and your cousin, Abu Sufyan ibn al-Harith. So be pleased with him, O Messenger of Allah. Be pleased with him. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, قَدْ فَعَلْتُ وَغَفَرَ اللَّهُ لَهُ كُلَّ عَدَاوَةٍ عَادَانِهَا. I have done so, meaning I'm pleased with him, and Allah has forgiven all of the enmity he had toward me. Okay? And what's amazing is that Abu Sufyan ibn Harith, the way he describes it, right? And I mentioned this in the khutbah as well. He says, فَاسْتَطَارَ فُؤَادِي فَرَحًا بِرِضَى رَسُولِ اللَّهِ عَنِّي. My heart was like flying with joy and happiness because the Prophet ﷺ was pleased with me. And he said, وَقَبَّلْتُ رِجْلَهُ فِي الرِّكَابِ. I kissed his leg in the saddle. Imagine the psychological and emotional weight that was lifted off his shoulders at that point. Here he is, consistently sitting at the door of the Prophet ﷺ. And every time he comes out, he simply turns away. He came in, he said, I'm going to make up for everything. I'm going to show, number one, that I'm loyal. Number two, that I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. I'm going to show it. And he showed it through his actions. Right? And the Prophet ﷺ, he turned to him at that time. He says, ثُمَّ الْتَفَتَ إِلَيَّ فَقَالَ أَخِي لَعَمْرِي تَقَدَّمْ فَضَارِبْ. My brother, move forward and strike. Right? And he says that made me, encouraged me in such a way that we fought and we routed them. They retreated and scattered in all directions. Right? Here is somebody, and this is what I mentioned, he said, I'm going to do whatever it takes. And that's the thing that I tried to mention in the khutbah is we have to have the mindset that if I want to be better, if I want to change, I have to try and do whatever it takes. Right? In his particular position, he said, if I have to sit at the door of the Prophet ﷺ, that's what I'll do. If I have to put my life on the line, if I have to show that, that's what I'll do. Right? And sometimes that's the position that we are going to be in. Right? There's certain moments that, and I mentioned this as well in the khutbah, there's certain moments that we'll all have in our life. Maybe you get one, maybe more, right? Where you're at a crossroads, right? And the situation comes up, and now you have to step up. And you have to do something. And you have to make a decision. Either you make a decision to do nothing, or step up and do something to change for the better. That was one of the points that I mentioned as a takeaway. Another one of the points that I mentioned as well was the concept of redemption. What do I mean? Right? Look what he came back from. He came back from being the childhood best friend of the Prophet ﷺ, to then fighting him for 20 years, and then redeeming himself, completely redeeming himself, coming back from all that, to being forgiven. What does that tell us? You think you can't come back for something you've done? Right? You can come back too. Right? You can be better. Anything that you've done in the past, you don't think that I can't come back from that. There's no way I can come. There's no way Allah will forgive me for that. Don't think like that. Right? You can come back. Allah will forgive. Right? And one particular point that I'll stress again, and I mentioned in the khutbah, but I'll mention again one more time, is that as long as you turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you're sincere, again, underline, sincere, you're sincere, will He reject you? No. He's not going to reject you. But you have to have the right intention, and you have to be sincere. As long as you have that, He's not going to reject you. Right? Keep that in mind. Keep that in mind that no matter what I've done, I can come back from that. I can redeem myself. I can be better. Right? So we mentioned at the beginning as well the concept of consistency and those small actions, building upon those. So I'll skip through that. And then I also talked about 3 examples from the righteous and from the prophets alayhim salam, and how we have to do everything in our power to impact a particular situation, right? And how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even in those instances where He gave them help, right, He still gave them certain action items to do, right? And we gave the example, we gave the example of Musa alayhi salam, where Allah told him what? He said, وَأَوْحَيْنَا إِلَى مُوسَى أَن نَضْرِبْ بِعَصَاكَ الْبَحْرَ. Right? We told Musa alayhi salam to take your staff and to hit the sea. Right? And then فَانْفَلَقَ فَكَانَ كُلُّ فِرْقٍ كَالطَّوْدِ الْعَظِيمِ. Right? So then it split, and each part was like a big mountain. So the question is right, and I mentioned this, the staff is not what split the ocean. Allah is the one who split the ocean, but He told Musa, you have to do this. You take this action item. The same thing with the snakes, right? When the magicians were going against Musa, right? His action item was take that snake, take their staff and throw it down, right? Then it would overcome the other ones. So there's something that has to be done at all times. And I gave 2 examples. I gave example of Nuh alayhi salam, right? When Allah told him what? He didn't tell him, you and the believers are going to be here, the water will go around you, relax, sit back, kick back. No, He said, وَاصْنَعِ الْفُلْكَ بِأَعْيُنِنَا وَوَحْيِنَا. You have to construct the ship. You have to take an action item. Do it. Do this first, then I'll take care of the rest. I'll help you out, right? And the same thing with Maryam alayhi salam, right? She's in labor, she's in pain, she's in agony, right? She even at one point says what? She says, I wish that I was like, like I was like forgotten, like long and forgotten, because she's in so much pain. And He says what? وَهُزِّي إِلَيْكِ بِجِذْعِ النَّخْلَةِ تُسَاقِطُ عَلَيْكِ رُطْبًا جَنِيًّا. Take the palm, the trunk of the palm, and shake it. Someone who's a not even pregnant, someone who is just, even a grown man, it's hard to shake the trunk of a palm, but no, the point is not that you're going to do something. The point is you take some action. Do what Allah commanded you to do. And that's what I have to think about. Am I doing what Allah commanded me to do so that I receive His help? Am I doing everything in my power that I can get that? Right? So keep those things in mind as well, right? Okay, and then I mentioned the concept of there's certain moments that in our life where that we take advantage of for that positive change, and then also, I ended the khutbah by talking about how whenever we do anything, any type of change that we make sure you have the right intention and seek the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Because in the end, that's what counts. It's not about the pleasure of anybody else. Somebody approves, doesn't approve, someone likes it, doesn't like it, someone hates you, doesn't hate you. Put that to the side. That again, it doesn't mean we treat people in a bad way, no. But again, and one of the points that I mentioned during the khutbah was, well, no matter what you do, someone's not going to like it. You cannot please everybody. It doesn't matter what you do. Someone's going to criticize, right? That's the way people are. That's the way life is, right? So keep in mind that I need to please Allah. That's it. And then we ended by saying what? The same way that Abu Sufyan ibn Harith was interacting and seeing the Prophet, one day all of us will have a chance to see him, inshallah. Right? We all will have a chance to be in front of him. And I gave the advice to not put yourself in a position to where he looks at you and he turns away from you. Right? Put yourself in a position where he sees you and he's proud of you. Right? That you can say, I did my best to represent you, O Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I did the best that I could to live in your way, in your example, right? And inshallah, with that, he would intercede for us on that day when there's no intercession except by the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So inshallah, that's the summary. Inshallah, I think I hit on the main points and I add a little bit more. So hopefully for those who couldn't be there and make it, that it was beneficial, inshallah, in some way. Jazakallahu khairan. Do you want to?
So, Jazakallah khairan, Brother Ali. I think we had a lot of rules before, and I was wondering if we need to keep revising, because each time we revise, but we are not moving forward. So I'll just try to mention one small rule today, short rule. Then we can start applying in this short time before Aisha, inshallah. So we had mad before, the rules for the noon, for the tajweed stuff for reading, for those who were not with us before. So today we are going to touch base with a topic called tafkhim and tarqiq. Okay? Tafkhim means the letters that are heavy by nature, okay, in the Arabic language. Tarqiq means the letters which are light. So there are some letters which are only heavy or thick, which are ta, dha, ghain, kha, sad, and dad. These are heavy all the time. So when you read these letters, they are heavy by nature. There are other letters, almost every other letter is light in nature. But there are three letters which may be in between, which are in between. So you can make them thick and heavy, and also in other cases you can make them light. These letters are the ra, lam, and alif. Okay. So today we touch base with the ra and different rules for the ra. I was not intending to talk about these, but I will just I tawakkal to Allah and I will start, inshallah. So the ra, today we will not say everything. We'll just start by the ra, and inshallah next week, inshallah, we can continue. Okay. So as my teacher told me, so the rules for the ra simply will be, I shared on the group image or a picture including all the rules. Okay. But we'll go through these by just for the examples. Okay. So please try to open this image and I will tell you how we will proceed. We will not take all the rules. Okay. So by default, we have, you are not on the group? Add him, please. Okay. So what are the movements of the letters that we know? We know the movements which are fatha, dhamma, kasra. So if the ra is with fatha, it will be ra. If it is with kasra, it will be ri. If it is with dhamma, it will be ru. So the movements for the ra are ra, ri, ru. Okay? So what's the difference between the ra if it is heavy or it is light? I'll just give you an example. Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahman. So in your opinion, this ra, Ar-Rahman, is heavy or light? Ar-Rahman, so it is heavy, thick. But Ya ayyuha al-muddathir, thir. Ya ayyuha al-muddathir. Now the ra is light. Okay, so this is the difference. Keep in mind. Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahman, so ra is heavy, thick. But muddathir, thir, right, Jibreel? Now it is light. Okay, so this is the difference between heavy, mufakham, or muraqqaq, light. Okay, so I told you how it looked like, how this will be pronounced. So why I asked you about the movements, ra, ri, ru, because simply, if the letter ra itself has dhamma or fatha, you will pronounce it heavy, like Ar-Rahman, Ramadan. Okay, so if it is with fatha or dhamma, kafaru, ru. Okay, so if it is with fatha or dhamma, equals heavy. If it is with kasra, okay, if it is with kasra, it equals light, like the example on this chart on the upper left, Kareem, Kareem. So for each case, just keep one example and know this example, then you can apply later on. So again, when you look at the ra itself, you have three possibilities. If it is maftuha, ra, Ramadan, Rahman, so it is heavy. If it is madmuma, like kafaru, ru, so it is heavy. If it is with kasra, kari, kareem, so it is light. Okay? So this is the first possibility, that the movement itself, either fatha, dhamma, or kasra, right? Someone come to you and ask you, okay, if it is not fatha or dhamma or kasra, it is sukoon, so there is no movement. What should I do? In this case, you will go one letter before. So this is general rule. We'll go with more details next lesson, inshallah. So someone may come with a word and say, what about this? Just wait. Take it step by step. So if it is not fatha, dhamma, or kasra on the ra, there is sukoon. What should I do? Go with your eyes one letter before the ra. One letter before the ra. And ask yourself, if the letter before the ra, fatha or dhamma or kasra. Okay? If it is fatha or dhamma, make the ra heavy. If the letter before the ra is kasra, make the ra light. Okay? So it's the same pace. We started with ra itself. If the movement of the ra, fatha, dhamma, kasra, I look at it. If dhamma or fatha, make it heavy. If kasra, make it light. So if there is nothing on the ra, It is sukun, go one letter before. Okay? The letter before the ra. Dhamma or fatha make the ra heavy. If the letter before the ra and the ra is sukun is kasra, make the ra light. Okay? Okay. Is that easy? What happens if the ra has sukun and the letter before it also has no movement? What should I do? What do you expect? Huh? Yeah, look the letter before and before the ra, okay? What's the case? If it is fatha or dhamma, what you will do? Heavy. If it is kasra, make it light, okay? Simple rule, with some exceptions, okay? Later on, we'll go through. So, let's open the chart that you have on the group has all the rules. Go and just check for the examples. But now we will apply through Surah Al-Muddathir. I will read and you tell me the ra should be heavy, مفخم, or light, مرقق. يا أيها المدثر. Surah number, I don't have it, 74? 74, right? Yes. Surah number 74, Al-Muddathir. يا أيها المدثر. We have ra here in Muddathir. So ra here has fatha or dhamma or kasra when I read it. Huh? Ra has what? Sukun, guys. I stopped, so it's sukun. Ya ayyuhal muddathir. I didn't continue reading, right? So when I stopped, I made sukun. Okay? So it has sukun. What should I do? Look at which letter before it. What's the letter before it? Tha. Tha has dhamma, kasra, fatha, sukun. Huh? Kasra, right? Kasra. Ya ayyuhal muddathir. So the letter before the ra is maksur, so you make it light. Ya ayyuhal muddathir. Okay. Qum fa'anzir. Again, ra has sukun. You look before it. The letter before it has kasra. You make it light. Okay? وَرَبَّكَ فَكَبِّرْ. In this ayah we have two ra. The first one is وَرَبَّكَ. وَرَبَّكَ. This ra has sukun, fatha, dhamma, kasra. Fatha equals heavy. وَرَبَّكَ. Okay? فَكَبِّرْ. Huh? The second ra in kabbir. Now I made sukun. The letter before it is kasra. You make it light. Okay, continue. وَثِيَابَكَ فَطَهِّرْ. I cannot simulate. فَطَهِّرْ. Am I correct? Or فَطَهِّرْ. فَطَهِّرْ or فَطَهِّرْ. You tell me. Huh? Someone. Yusuf. Raise your voice. Why? Ra, sukun. Look before it. Kasra, make it light. Okay? It's like equations in the math. وَالرُّجَزَ فَهْجُرْ. Okay, we have two ra here. First one, وَالرُّجَزَ. وَالرُّجَزَ. Ra. Ra, dhamma. So, heavy. وَالرُّجَزَ. The second one, فَهْجُرْ. I'm trying to make it. فَهْجُرْ or فَهْجُرْ. Second one or first one? فَهْجُرْ or فَهْجُرْ. Second one. Why? There's sukun, right? On the ra, because I stopped. So I looked the letter before it. There is dhamma, right? So dhamma, make it heavy. فَهْجُرْ. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. So just wait for the azan. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. For those who are online, we have the azan, so I will be waiting. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا لا حول ولا قوة. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. اللهم رب هذه الدعوة التامة والصلاة القائمة آت سيدنا محمدا الوسيلة والفضيلة والدرجة الرفيعة بعث اللهم من مقام المحمود الذي وعدته. صلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. Okay, continue inshallah for maybe 2 minutes to 3 minutes and go for prayer inshallah. Okay, so we stopped at والرجز فهجر and we know that والرجز راء مضمومة, so we make it heavy. فهجر, so the راء with sukun here. Before it, you look at the letter before it, it has dhamma, so you make it heavy. Okay, we continue. ولا تمنن تستكثر. Okay, so the ra, there was a mistake I made. Okay, so look at the ra. When I stopped, there is sukun, right? Before it, kasra. So tastakthir. Okay, make it light. But I made a mistake in this ayah. What was the mistake? ولا تمنن تستكثر. Huh? Yeah, guys, I didn't revise, but we had this before. ولا تمنن تستكثر. Okay, so إخفاء. You forgot the noon. We focused on the ra and we forgot the noon. Okay, ولا تمنن تستكثر. I don't know Aisha why they didn't pick it. Okay. ولربك فاصبر. We have two ra. First one, ولرا ra. So ra fatha, make it heavy. ولربك فاصبر. را سكون, look before it, there is kasra, make it light. فإذا نقر في الناقور. Okay, نقر را فتحة, make it heavy, تفخيم. فإذا نقر في الناقور. So this is light, this light or heavy. ناقور. Sa'ad, you were watching the fireworks, so okay, you didn't listen to that. Okay. في الناقور. This ra in naqur, light or heavy? And why? If you said light, you say why. If you said heavy, you said why.
The letter before it is sakin.
Okay.
And then the letter before that is mahmud.
Okay, so brother Ahmed ruined the question. Okay. في الناقور. So we made sukun on the ra, right? We look at the letter before it. The letter before it is fatha or dhamma or kasra. The waw here is not, has sukun, okay? So you look the letter before and before, okay? Which is qaf in this case, has dhamma, so make it the qaf itself was one of the حروف الاستعلاء of no problem. فذلك يومئذ يوم عسير. عسير or عسير. عسير. We made sukun on the ra. You look at the letter before it. Sukun. Go one letter more. Sin kasra. عسير. Okay. على الكافرين غير يسير. غير رو. Okay. غير راء مضمومة. Right. So غير يسير. So this ra, the second one. Look before it. Yeah. سكون سين كسرة يسير. Okay. So we'll just try to apply these simple rules. Inshallah, next week, inshallah, we'll dive more with the ra. Okay. And do not forget to revise the rules that we had before. Okay. سبحانك اللهم بحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. جزاكم الله خيرا.